there should be a better approach to
that. Yeah. I'm afraid Jabiri, I disagree with Jabiri, and I think he falls prey, on the one hand, to some Western scholarship misunderstandings, and follows them. And secondly, he falls prey to a Moroccan Maghribi nationalism. I think that's the thing. The thing that he falls prey to the Western nonsense is the Avicenna. He thinks that Avicenna was a mystical writer, and so away from reason, because Avicenna has a book which he called the Eastern Philosophy, which 20th century authors misinterpret as a mystical philosophy. So Jabiri believes that without having read anything, because there's no such book, basically. There is some book, but there is logic that we have mostly in some physics. So he thinks that since Avicenna wrote this book, he must have been a mystic. And of course, Averroes was the pure rationalist as such. So clearly, if you want to support rationalism in Islam, you have to support Averroes. And since the East did not support Averroes, but they preferred Avicenna, so this is simply a construction in the mind, actually, of Jabiri, not real history as such. That's it.
So I would like to come back from philosophy to the sources, for example. From my reading in popular texts on this period and on this topic, there is a controversy about how the early Christians, especially East Roman Christians, perceived Islam. For example, whether Islam was a Christian heresy.
Yes.
And what is behind it? Because apparently some apocryphic texts, Christian texts in Syria were read and utilized by Arabic scholars when they recompiled or wrote or interpreted this Quran. So what is the state of research on this field? So how Christian is Quran? Because when you read it, you find so many biblical references and biblical sections.
Well, let me give you both a Muslim answer and a scholarly answer, which is the same, basically. The Quran presents itself as the Word of God, which was given before to Moses and to Jesus. But the followers of Moses and Jesus, and especially the priests, and the rabbis and the priests alternately, they corrupted the text, the famous tahrif. They corrupted the text. So what we actually have in the existing Bible and in the existing New Testament are corruptions of the original text given to them by God. Then, of course, God decided a third time to give the real text to the Arabs, to Muhammad, and so we have the real text. So the Quran by itself generates this linear connection to the Hebrew Bible, basically. And this was certainly something that's obvious if you read the Quran, and also obvious to the first Muslims. That's why from the very beginning, again, some of those scholars that were studying the Quran tried to find more about some of the allusions to the Hebrew prophets that we have in the Quran. So we have a whole range of literature in early Arabic called the Israeliyat, writings about the Israelite history and Israelite, of course, personalities from the Bible as such. There was. And I presume for that, some of the sources, they must have been, they asked Jewish scholars who may not have converted to Islam, and asked them, well, tell us about this particular person, because the Quran makes some mention of it, but does not give the full story. What's the full story behind it, of course? So they collected all these things, and this was very much an accepted part, basically, of the early Quranic commentary and Quranic studies. So this is the Muslim view, which, well, I think basically is correct. That's, so the Quran said, this is why I find sometimes difficult to understand how people step away from what the Quran actually says, because first the Quran does this with regard to Judaism and Christianity, and secondly, itself is a very historically situated text. I mean, it itself situates itself in a particular history. he talks about the room, talks about the Romans, basically the reference to Heraclius. So he's talking about contemporary events. So although, of course, the original, so to speak, is the eternal word of God and has been with God from eternity, obviously, but nevertheless, the fact that it was revealed at a particular point in time and that it refers itself to historical events of the time is historically very much a situated kind of text. So trying to understand that historical context in which the Quran was revealed was both something which the early Muslim scholars did and which, of course, modern scholarship is doing. This corpus Coranicum, in a sense, tries to do exactly that, tries to see what other kinds of, let's say, if you can find a prayer, which was perhaps in Syria, and you can have a couple of lines, and those two lines may come very close to what is being said in the Quran in Arabic. Fine. What does this mean? I mean, again, the Muslim answer to that would be, well, obviously, because, again, this was something that was given to Christians by God, and they were using it, and of course God wanted to use this same expression because it was a true expression, so to speak, when he gave the Quran in Arabic. I mean, there is no, how should I say, disparity in the interpretation. Of course, you can say that, well, Muhammad went around and he was collecting all those snippets of prayers from everybody and put them together and he made the Quran. Okay, so what do you gain by that? I mean, it doesn't really explain. Plus, of course, it disregards the great, the unity that the Quran gives, a sense of unity as being compiled, composed basically. The style is quite uniform. The tone of voice that it has. There's a very nice book recently by Stefan Wilde, a German professor who's retired now from Bonn, Self-Referentiality in the Quran. It's a very intelligent book which exactly discusses these very issues as to how the Quran presents itself. Basically. It's a very alive text that presents itself and takes issue with things happening, basically. And so clearly it is a text which, if anybody were to look at it, it is not simply a compilation by snippets from here and there. I have the feeling that it's deeper. I'm sorry?
It's deeper.
It's much deeper than that. Yeah, it's much deeper than that. And as I said, it's a very alive text and a very intelligent text. So, I mean, I don't know if it is the later Islamic dogma was that it is inimitable. No human can write in the same style. Some people did try, presumably Al-Jahiz did, so to speak, but I guess nobody succeeded. But whatever the case might be, it is quite a unique book in that sense. So, as I said, I mean, I don't see any reason to believe someone says, okay, of course there may be some formula in there, let's say, which may be repeated in some Syrian prayer and everything, but certainly it's not a patch, cut up in glue, some paste kind of job as such. Yes? I'm sorry.
So, this is an offshoot of the last exchange. I haven't read you previously, and that's why this is going to be a pedestrian question. Specifically, I'm not exactly sure what one is to do about the charge of Orientalism. I mean, it's clear what's wrong with certain forms of Orientalism. I guess Orientalism defined, as broadly the charge that inquiry somehow assigns differentiation or differentness to the other. I mean, the object of inquiry, and I guess this problem, I guess, or this situation can take many different forms. I mean, it can take the form of saying that one can study Arabs only if one studies religion, and one can study Arabs only if one realizes that they're not capable of philosophy and so on and so forth. But let's say, if we try to avoid it, how can one do so? I mean, you suggested certain ways in which one can avoid this problem. I mean, one, I guess, is what you call the objective study of the text, and paying attention to the context of the writing of the text, and so on and so forth. And from your last exchange, it was clear that you think that there's something self-standing about the text, and perhaps a more like aligned understanding of this text may give us a different perspective. But what if it turns out that even if we discover the text, and even if we discover that the text is not just a religious text, but also gives rise to philosophy, what if it turns out that there's something still unique about the way in which people of this region somehow have been thinking and philosophizing? I mean, what if it turns out that somehow that
Are you talking about the text of the Quran or about philosophy?
let's say both, the law and the philosophy and the laws and the religion of peoples around here, for example, may turn out to be still different. What if it turns out, in other words, that Orientalism is not a charge, but actually something which is inevitable? What if it turns out, that somehow there is something different, there is something unique about the particular ways in which human beings do? This kind of question also appears. I'm sorry. One last thought. In understanding also, for example, the philosophy of Germany or philosophy of England. Despite interactions, it may turn out that philosophy in Germany has its own unique institutional.
Sure, but the way as I understand Said and those people, is not that, yes, of course, all societies, no matter how close one is to the other, the social products, the intellectual products, are very much a product of that society, and they have a certain distinctiveness about them, simply because they were produced at that time, at that place, so to speak, and in that particular language, which has its own history, its own allusions, its own, of course, inferential context as such. So the other does not simply try to say, well, the other is different, but this is made into a cause to reify, to use that so to speak word, to make something an object that is a dead object, which then can be taken down and saying that, well, that is not good or something. So it is used for destructive purposes rather than for purposes to understand. It is used also for purposes exactly to hide that understanding. And you say, oh, these people I can think straight, so I don't understand them, basically, because they are Muslims or something. So the other, in a sense, is some kind of both a power play over the other and a self-justification for not engaging with it. Sometimes it's too different, or it's too crazy, or it is too other, basically. So it was used in that sense, not simply that each culture has its own distinctiveness. That certainly is the case. But the point should be precise to understand the distinctiveness. Why is it that? What is that distinctiveness of that culture? And the way to do it is simply not to find labels and say, oh, it is because they are Muslims, but try to find out how the society works. Why a particular work was determined. For example, just the question that the gentleman asked about Al-Ghazali. Why did Al-Ghazali feel